since 2010 as a traveling multimedia consultant. And he will be talking to us about immersive technologies and how his IMEX lab within teaching and learning with technology in Penn State has been working to inspire faculty and students to use XR. And then after Nicholas, we'll be hearing from Dr. Eileen Oconnor, who is coming to us with a background in chemistry, has worked for IBM before moving into immersive education in the 1990s. She's been using immersive VR since 2006 for teaching, for meetings, for communication platforms, and has also been teaching adult online students, graduate students, how to create VR environments in order to meet their needs. After hearing from Dr. Eileen Oconnor, we're going to move to a group of presenters from Ithaca College, which is a university in Ithaca, New York in the United States. And we will be hearing from Dr. Becky Lane, an instructional designer and VR director of IC Immersive, which is an initiative focused on integrating XR technologies into teaching and learning at Ithaca College. We'll also be hearing from, in the same group, Dr. Christine Havens-Hafer, an assistant professor in the Department of Education at Ithaca College, as well as from students Catherine Fiore, Brianna Mutsindashyaka, and a recent grad from Ithaca College, Lauren Suna. And so with that, we can get started with the presentation from Nicholas.
Great, thanks, Elena. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, and can I advance the slides or can you?
I can.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so as everyone heard, my name is Nick. I'm from Penn State University. I'm specifically working with a group called the Media Commons. And the goal of that group over the last 10 to 12 years has been to provide multimedia production resources as well as consultation services for faculty and students working on media projects ranging from documentaries to public service announcements and other things. So that's the background of where we're coming from within the university and specifically within that teaching and learning with technology group. Within the last 4 years now, we've been working on figuring out how we can offer similar services around immersive tech, specifically 360-degree video, which I think fits really closely with our background in traditional video, as well as virtual reality and augmented reality. So we actually created a space at our primary campus. So we have, for those of you less familiar with the university, we have 24 campuses and locations. The biggest and primary of which is University Park, which is located in the center of Pennsylvania. And at that campus, we did create a immersive experiences lab, which we abbreviate to IMEX Lab. And that is a space where we actually have a viewing station. We call it our pinwheel theater, space for students to go and actually view 360-degree video and virtual reality content, as well as a loaning pool of equipment there, and then expand it out through our Commonwealth campuses that students can take into the field to produce 360 video and other immersive content. So through that space and through talking to faculty directly across the university, as well as working with our instructional design partners and others at the libraries and our online ARM World Campus, we've certainly been raising awareness about the availability of immersive tech and the usefulness of immersive as a way of teaching about anything, but primarily, things that are not convenient to get to. So far-flung locations, points in the past, points in outer space, under the sea that people obviously can't travel to. And faculty are getting excited about it, but they may not necessarily know how it's being applied in the real world. And so that's where our Get Inspired resource that lives on our website comes in. It's a resource that we created specifically to connect the dots between the technologies that we have on offer and that we're helping faculty to implement in their classrooms, and how those things are being used in real life scenarios. So with each of those, there's a place to find out more about the specific example, as well as then some assignment ideas that go all the way from very low stakes and maybe not even necessarily access to the technologies for creation or consumption, to full-fledged, you're going to go out and shoot a 360 video, you're going to go and actually spend time in a virtual world. And so with that, that's my 3 minutes, and I will pass on to the next person.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. Can we give Nick a round of applause with the F4 function? Great, thank you so much. With that, we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Eileen O'Connor.
Okay, and let me know if you can't hear me. I'll assume you can hear me. I'm waiting for the graphic to come up. Very envious of the work you're doing and want to hear more about it. I've been involved in immersive technologies before the term became popularized by headsets and stuff. In the late 1990s, just after I finished my doctorate, I was working at an engineering school, watching the kids go into gaming, and wanted to get that type of environment for my own work, and I tend to be mostly in the sciences. And I went over to the State University and began teaching in 100% online courses. That's where I first got introduced to Second Life, which is the classic immersive technology, long before headsets came along. And we taught courses there. I had my students meet and interact, but it became very expensive. So what we then did was found in about 2010, open source became available. And I had my students and my own programs meet within these spaces. So I just have a couple of snapshots here of things that we've done. And what you can do today is download entire pre-made islands that have been made available by artists, Creative Commons artists. And so my students are adults. They come in between the age of 25 and say 65, coming in from other professions, wanting to learn how to use technology. They love making their own islands. And we've started to develop a virtual residency in this area. And about 2017, the end of that year, we started an Institute for New Paradigms, which was comprised of my own students and alumni, and we bring in people from around the world. I would like to say we have big numbers. We don't. I'll have to be honest. I am a bootstrap operation. I am a faculty member who sees the vision. And I did work for IBM for 10 years, and I just love technologies. But I'm not a programmer. I don't really have those resources. So I use what I can scrounge. What I do for this group was, if you go to my profile, I snuck in a website that has just some of the highlights of my work and some of the ways you could reach me, because I would like to get others to maybe join us in this institute. We're looking at cost-effective ways. I'm very interested in breaking into the faculty mindset, which can be rather antithetical to immersive environments. It can be sort of an extra piece thrown in. So I will stop now, and I hope that people can join us later and maybe join up with some of my groups. And again, if you look at my profile, you should be able to get that website link, and I threw everything in there.
Great, thank you so much, Eileen. Let's give Eileen a round of a hand. Again, this is F4. And I think as you're speaking, I'm already seeing connections between the work that you're doing and potentially the work that Nick has presented. When you're talking about breaking through the faculty mindset. So in our Q&A, I'm really looking forward to potentially exploring those connections. And so with that, we'll move to the third presentation, which is from a group of presenters from Ithaca College. And my apologies for not mentioning the title of the presentations for the last two, but I have this in front of me now. For the Ithaca College group, they are presenting on virtual reality student teaching experience, a live remote option for learning, teaching skills during campus closure and social distancing.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Becky Lane, and I hope you all can hear me. So I'm leading the initiative at Ithaca College to integrate immersive technologies into teaching and learning. We've been active a few years now, primarily engaging students in creating things like 360 videos and virtual tours with Google Tour Creator, and also working with faculty to let them experience VR technology and to show them how to incorporate primarily third-party apps into their courses. But when COVID hit us and campus closed, we had a really unique situation with our education department. The students needed a place to teach, to practice their teaching. They needed a live classroom, but there were no students. So we quickly put together a pilot using the Oculus Go and Rumi, which is a social VR platform that was free till the end of the semester, to give the students an embodied, interactive, and immersive environment in which to practice their teaching skills. So we found 20 Oculus Go's, and we mailed each student their own Oculus Go and provided support to them through the last 2 months of the class that they were in, and used the headsets for social interaction and teaching practice. So today we're here to share the process and our lessons learned, and also to talk a little bit about the next iteration of this project, which is going to be using the Oculus Quest and AltSpace VR. And I'm going to turn it to Christine to let her talk a little bit about the pedagogy of the class.
Thank you, Becky. I'm an assistant professor at Ithaca College in the Department of Education. I primarily work with our teacher education cohorts, the graduate and the undergraduate cohorts. And what we found over the years prior to the quarantine shutting us down and having us taking our students out of a live classroom is that micro-teaching is a valuable way of having them learn the skills that they need. Part of the process for the pedagogy and practice course that I teach is that they learn how to plan their lessons for their content areas, and then they micro-teach them to the class with the other students in the class taking on the role of the students. And then there's a process where they give feedback and they strengthen their teaching practice in that way. By using the the virtual reality or immersive experience, we can now put them into a social interaction or environment where they're able to do these things by us creating a classroom where they can still have this process of interaction and being with each other without it feeling so removed or so remote, because it is a very important part of the process that they learn how to become actual instructors. And that involves developing these VR activities, which they then give the class to complete, or perhaps they put them in discussion groups and they are able to interact in that way as well. Either way, the VR planning provides these opportunities for educator training to implement the VR and immersive technology in the classrooms, and allows for remote teaching. Because if anything, from this experience, what we've discovered is there is a growing need to come up with more creative and innovative means for reaching students. And using the VR is a benefit to the academic culture. It gives them that opportunity to learn about different teaching models and then put these into practice and give students a more realistic or robust and synchronous teaching practice opportunity that they're lacking without being in their classrooms. And this is what we plan to do beginning at the first week in July, when I begin with my graduate cohort with the pedagogy and practice course. And we have already sent them their Oculus Quests, and the hope is that they will then do this and implement this. I will now turn this over to Lauren Suna. She will be speaking for the immersive technology specialists who are working with us on this process.
I'm Lauren Suna, and I'm a recent graduate of Ithaca College, and I was lucky enough to work with our other fantastic students, Catherine and Brianna, as the student associate of this project. So during the program, we noticed that many of the students had anxieties about utilizing the technologies, especially since most of them were first-time virtual reality users. In order to calm anxieties, we wanted to encourage individual exploration while having a safety net in the form of an endpoint specialist assigned to them, whether that was Catherine or Brianna, and then I did technical support in the background. When students were assigned specialists to guide them through this process, we noticed that they felt more confident within the space and more comfortable to experiment within their presentations, whether it was through the utilization of objects and or videos within space in Rumi. I am going to hand it back over to Becky and Christine to talk about the student feedback.
So I know we're going a little more than our 4 minutes, so I'll keep this this feedback short. They liked it. They liked the social aspect of it. They did not like when the Oculus Go overheated or when Rumi glitched or they couldn't be heard. So it's pretty much what you might think. They saw a lot of value in the being together in a room, and the embodiment piece was really important. And it was fun watching them interact with each other. But they were also pretty vocal about choosing the right tool for the right lesson. And if there was not a need for the VR, they were fine in Zoom. And that's all we have.
Great, thank you so much. And again, a round of applause for the team from Ithaca. So with this, we can move right into questions. So if you have questions, I know that I have a ton of questions, but would like to give people an opportunity to put their questions into the public chat. And I think we can start. There were a couple of questions in here, some clarifying questions. And I believe the first one may have been for Dr. Eileen Oconnor from Shadi, asking about what are the open source programs that you've used for the islands where you're teaching your adult graduate students?
Okay, thank you for asking. It gets a little involved. OpenSimulator.org is actually the granddaddy of the program. What happens, Second Life is a well-designed, expensive program that costs almost $300 a month to own, and it's about $1,000 to start. So the coders made this available, and you could go into something called GitHub, where you can get the technology and download it. What's happened though over time, and what I use is something I will put in here, and if you go to all of my materials, it's all kind of in there, and I would welcome people to join me. Kitely.com is what I use with my students. We can get an island for $20 a month and have up to 40 avatars on it 24/7. And you can pay a little more and get more avatars. They're much more realistic looking than these avatars. They can do more things, but you still now own so for $20 a month, you can get the benefit of the open source skeleton that goes into it. And they use things called viewers. And the viewer that I use is from a company, another open source called Firestorm. So I'm not quite sure. If you do go into my materials, you'll see how to get to these. But we use the Firestorm viewer, which puts in, I think it's .com, puts in the capacity to be able to see these islands that are served through, in my case, kitely.com. Now, if your school is willing to support this, you could serve them off your school servers. So you don't need to actually rent a server. And that's why I envy many of you who are at schools that get a lot more support than I do. So I have to bootstrap. I have my students, when they're in the course with me, they pay the $20 a month. I also use it in my own classes. They learn how to get into the environment before they decide whether they want to take the course. My courses are 100% online. I wanted them to be social communities. So I've used VR as a meeting space for a number of years, and I bring them in for one assignment. We then, learn how to dress our avatar for we visit, so they've had some preparation. If they decide they like it, then they can take the follow-up course with me. So I hope that answers your question. But I can give you lots of resources if you, get in touch with me.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I think that's really useful and really appreciate sending the links through. I think it'll be interesting to come back to this issue of support and resources for this kind of work. And I know that there's another question from someone else. I believe this is for the group from Ithaca. Just a clarification about the student teachers who were participating in the VR teaching experience, if these were undergrad students.
I can take that question. So in the spring, when we first did this, we had undergrad students. The students I'm having in July are the graduate students. So this is entirely graduate based for our summer session. Our graduate students have a 12-month process to get to their MAT. So, and this is the beginning of their actual process of getting it, is taking this pedagogy and practice course in July. So we only have graduate students at this time, but it's a mix during the year.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. We have another question from Arun, and I believe this is for Nick, but I'm not, it could actually potentially be relevant for others as well. The question is, what format did you find the most effective in immersive education? Is it 360-degree videos, 3D VR worlds, room scale, seated, etc.? And if Arun, if you want to clarify who this question was for, I do believe it was for Nick. So I think maybe, Nick, if you don't mind answering.
Sure, yeah. So our whole approach is about scale and being able to offer activities that entire classes can take part in, particularly with the viewing activities. So we provide equipment, and I would love to get my hands on 20 of the Oculus Go's for one campus to use at one time. But we have definitely found that 360 video for a lightweight class activity works really well. For something more involved, certainly then moving into a virtual reality environment is doable, but if it's an instructor who just wants to dip their toes in and have their class, take a virtual field trip or something like that, some quick 360 video that we find on YouTube and wrap up in a class assignment has worked really well.
Great, thank you. And then for the other presenters, I'm not sure if the question is relevant for you, but if you have any kind of insights on particular aspects of VR that have been, or XR that have been, I think, more adopted than others, if you feel like commenting on that, you can as well.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit, and I'm going to ask Catherine and Brianna to talk a little bit about some of the projects they've done with the art department at Ithaca College, bringing them, looking at murals. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I can start. We had an art history teacher teaching her students that were aiming to be art teachers as well as just teachers in general. And what we had them do is go into our Oculus Rift headset and find murals in Google Maps. And we showed them the murals that they were studying in class so they can familiarize themselves with that sort of immersive feel of kind of seeing it in person.
And we had just one headset in use at that time, and we just had them come in groups of 3 or 4, and it was really successful. And we found that there's a lot of use for the virtual tour and the little tour creator as well.
And a follow-up question for Brianna, was this undergrad or graduate students for the art?
These were undergrad students, I believe.
Okay. I asked because we had another question from Matt about, let's see where to go. If anyone is aware of undergrad heavy use of immersive learning experiences, and I think this is a question for the 3 of you. And I know, Dr. Oconnor, it sounds like you focus mostly on adult graduate students, but I think I can pose this to the 3 presenters, maybe starting with Nick and then moving to Eileen and the Ithaca group, if you're aware of undergrad heavy use of immersive learning experiences.
So from our institution, the virtual field trip is definitely one of the heavier uses at the moment. And that can be field trips even within the town or general area where campus is located. With the larger classes, 100+ students, it can be really cost prohibitive and time intensive to take all of them to a location for, say, a geology study of a rock formation. So being able to have some of the students actually produce those 360 videos while they're in the field and then bring them back to share with classmates who can't make it has been a really useful application of that technology in particular.
And it's Eileen. I would ask Scott to come forward. I do have, and honestly, I didn't think through this format well enough. Scott has developed, he's one of my students, but keep in mind, my students are adults. So I'm not going to speak of his age, but Scott is an interior designer, a business entrepreneur, and very interested in art history. He has developed his own virtual environment to actually, which could become an undergraduate course, which we're trying right now to actually move into our undergraduate program. So I'm the one who kind of focuses and gets people thinking on development. But Scott, could you just take the mic for a moment and maybe talk about, and Scott is actually doing some presentations here, but on his own work, but could you talk about how your art curriculum, which is 100% online, you don't need a headset, but just how that could become part of an undergraduate general education course?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The intent behind what I was doing was to make the most out of the affordable uses of web-based virtual reality. I mean, we see a lot of experiences, we see a lot of talk about using them as immersive group experiences or for virtual tourism, but web-based VR is inherently interactive. You can hyperlink virtually anything into a web-based world. So you have access to all these wonderful OER resources out on the web. And my concept behind what I created was to create an immersive virtual environment where you approach an artifact, you can click on it or click on an information bar next to it, and it takes you to a source by a more knowledgeable other. And I use expert references from major museums around the world. So I'm aggregating all this information into one immersive little zone in virtual reality. And that's the goal behind this curriculum. At the same time, we're also building meta-literacies in the process. This was designed as an entry-level curriculum to give them skills that they're then going to take on to the rest of their college career and then out into the professional world as well. Because it's one thing to be able to make a TikTok, it's something completely different to be able to make a presentation like we're doing here today.
Thanks so much, Scott. So glad that you're with us in this audience and that you could share your experience with this.
Thank you. And Ithaca in the house. I'm in the same town y'all are, so.
Oh, great.
Props to the crew. Have a good one.
Nice.
Let's see, we have another question. It was from Julie. She's asking if any of the presenters or groups have used Alice from Carnegie Mellon. If so, what was your experience? And in case people are not aware, Alice is an education programming language where it uses a drag and drop environment that allows you to create computer animations with 3D models. So curious to know if any of the presenters have used this before.
We have not, but I think our library has used it.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe this is not something that has been used widely by our presenters. So we'll move on to the next question. And so for those of you who are using or engaging with people who are using VR headsets, do you have a preference for any particular type of headset tech choice?
Well, for us, I think the Oculus Quest is superior to the Go, which I guess was recently discontinued anyway. I'm sure we'll keep using ours, but the Quest is 6 degrees of freedom. It's untethered. It's a very nice, affordable headset that gives the users a really good experience. So I think that if I had to choose, and I guess I did choose the Oculus Quest.
Yeah, we also prefer untethered. We have lending pools of equipment generally through our libraries at every campus location. And so being able to lend an untethered headset is certainly a much easier proposition. The pricing too matches up pretty well with like a mid-range prosumer video camera. So being able to get those, 3, 4, 5 per campus to start certainly seems something doable within our budget.
And the downside is that you're sort of locked into the Oculus ecosystem to a certain extent. You can get around that with using Steam and using SideQuest, which is a way to get experiences on your headset outside of the Oculus system. But that's the only drawback that I see with the Oculus Quest.
Well, and luckily today it seems Oculus actually announced that you'll be able to sideload things easier onto the Quest as well. So we're definitely looking forward to experimenting with that.
Yes.
And just to note, for our pilot, we're also using Oculus Quest for pretty much all of the same reasons. The next question is for the group from Ithaca. And the question is, what actions can the students do in each virtual environment? Well, I believe, actually, I might be wrong. Maybe this is for everybody. Well, we'll see. What actions can the students do in each of the virtual environments? Was it mostly listening and speaking, or are you able to define specific interactions? Well, now that I'm reading this out loud, I think that maybe this is something that's applicable for all of our presenters. And I think maybe we can see if we want to go in the same order of presentation. So if Nick and then Eileen and the Ithaca group, if you have any comments about what actions students can do in each virtual environment, if it's mostly speaking and listening, or if there's definition of specific interactions.
Well, sure. So yeah, I can speak to one specific class example. So we have a biology class that starts out studying biomes around the world, both terrestrial and aquatic. They made use of 360 video as a consumption activity. So we actually worked with the HHMI free resource called the Biome Viewer, which I can post a link to in the chat, as a starting point so students could identify a terrestrial or aquatic biome they wanted to learn more about. They had essentially like a field notebook type activity that they were given. And so they went to each of those 5 in class and then the rest outside of class as pairs, and took notes on what they were observing based on the instructor's guidelines.
Great, thank you, Nick. Dr. O'Connor, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yes, and I just don't want to talk too long. I'm a teacher. And honestly, too, when you put a teacher in any platform, we talk too long. We go into the lecture mode. So what I've done, though, over the years, and Scott can come up and contradict me, try to, I integrate the virtual environment first into my course as a platform that we meet every number of weeks together. Now, again, my students are adults. They run from K-12 teachers to corporate designers. So I have to be very time sensitive to when I can get them in. But I honestly require them to come in. They're getting a degree in emerging technology, a master's in it. So they have to learn how to use these. So I honestly don't put up with, this is hard to do. And believe it or not, they all know how to do it. I make them work together. They get together and they learn how to dress their avatar. Avatars are much more complex. They learn how to do the dances. There are a lot more dances. They learn how to do, it's a much more robust environment than what you're in here. And so over the semester, they try different things, and then I loop them back into a discussion board. So they talk about what they're learning. They talk about identity and avatars. They go on tours. We're hyperlinked. So they can actually go to other islands created by other educators, by businesses. And so they share experiences. It's not to be didactic. It's not to be just presentations, and they immerse themselves. And so from that, the students themselves, I've had probably 40 or 50 students who've created islands that they make into their final projects to graduate. And it depends on their particular industry and interests. Now, I'll just tell you one that we did. I run the intro course. It's a segue into all things technology and all things virtual. And so it's a high-level course. We use Ed Psych principles, Vygotsky, Piaget, and I just throw them into the water to learn technology. And at the end of this past semester, in the spring, I had a whole group to do a COVID thing. I teamed them up. I had actually a medical doctor, a dentist, teamed him up with a soon-to-be instructional designer. I teamed up all sorts of people, and we created and added to the virtual environment some things that they felt would be helpful. And they really had only had a few basics on how do you build some widgets. And one group did incredible work. So I throw them in. I'm not going to babysit them. And from that, then if they feel this works for them, they can take the deeper course. So that's enough said for me. If you wouldn't mind, maybe Scott, you might talk a little bit about how you can really bring interactivity into these environments.
Yeah, and that is one of the truly great affordances of working in these web-based virtual worlds that you don't always get in a headset-based experience, is you can interact with individual artifacts. You can pick them up, you can click on them. Because of the OSSL scripting that's used for OpenSim, you have animations that can be pre-programmed into a number of things, and I make a huge use of these on the island, whether they're by actual contact clicking or sometimes just by a proximity trigger. As an avatar walks by, a sign will pop up telling them something they need to know. So, and it's really fairly simple scripting. It is based on a Java, and I confess I am an artist, I am not a scripter, but I can muddle my way through it based on what I know from HTML. And the beauty of OpenSim is it is a highly collaborative environment. So if I need something custom made, it costs me $4 or $5 in the Kitely market, and somebody in Germany or Japan or Korea scripts it out for me, sends me the customization that I can then adjust as I need, and I'm up and running and off I go.
And I have a few things to add, I think, about the different platforms. So we were really interested in embodiment. And before we did our pilot, we did a tour of all the major social VR platforms. And we talked about things like, do we want an entire body, or are we okay with a floating torso? What kind of facial expressions are possible? What kind of other ways are there to express yourself? Because one of the most frustrating things for me in some of these 2D environments is that I have to look for that F4 button and I clap, instead of just hitting a button and having a little heart pop up. So I find it a little stifling personally to not be able to feel as embodied in 2D as I am in 3D. So we looked at things like AltSpace and VTime and Engage and Roomy. And we landed on Roomy because it was honestly the easiest to onboard the students. But for our next level pilot, we're going to go with AltSpace because we feel it's a little bit more of a powerful platform.
And I'd love to just talk about some of the activities that we did in these spaces with the students. So I was one of the point specialists that was assigned to half of the class to help optimize their experience in VR and teach them all the controls and whatnot. And so what we ended up doing is we had a wonderful time meeting with them, showing them the controls, how to walk, how to emote as much as they can. So one of our favorites was, after a student would teach or present their lesson, we would have everyone shoot up emojis. And the biggest part was having and allowing for individual exploration. There was one time that we just sent the students out into the room that we were in, and we were like, go explore, go see what you can learn before we regrouped. And that was that energy that they had in that, and the excitement when they were talking between each other. When we regrouped, really you could tell that they were enjoying it. We also would optimize certain lesson plans. So I would bring in 3D objects to help stage activities that the teachers were hoping to present. So I know one person was working with art, so I created brought in some famous murals, and I could stage them around the room so the students could go and look at them. So that was an example of some of the things that we did with the students.
I agree with Catherine. I think that my students were very excited about this idea of being more interactive as opposed to in a Zoom session, just presenting and walking through the lesson and talking with people staring back at them. This gave them that opportunity to actually be in a social interaction and turn toward each other, talk to each other, move around the room, move to different spots of the room, being able to applaud or like she said, saying the emojis up, but just most importantly, they felt like they were actually in a classroom again, and that was the biggest value for my undergrad students that did this in April. And it gave us some really good information to build off of for the graduate cohort we're working with and in the next week or so, to be able to take their feedback and figure out ways that we can also bring more of this interaction into that space.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for these answers. The next question is about measurement and looking at measuring learning and pedagogy within immersive learning spaces and looking at the tools. It's a question about the types of tools that you have been using to assess learning. It sounds like in an immersive environment versus not an immersive environment, or maybe in the case of the Ithaca group, how have you been measuring, I think, the success of doing student teaching practicing in VR? And I think maybe we can go in the opposite direction. We can start with the Ithaca group and then go to Dr. O'Connor and then back to Nick.
I can.
Question. I just wanted to make sure I address both the quantitative as well as the qualitative measures, like survey measurements as well as biometrics.
Thank you for that clarification.
I can take on the first part of this, I guess. As far as how I evaluated my students and their ability to interact, I think that's the question, or am I incorrect?
Yes, student feedback.
So in this case, it was when I do this in a regular classroom where they're all in person, they take part in the micro teaching and then they have immediate feedback sheets they fill out. We still did that to a certain extent with this last group that we worked with, where they did have to still submit some feedback sheets to the teachers who were teaching, but we did in-person feedback on the spot as soon as the session had ended, which allowed them to be able to give immediate feedback to the teachers who had just performed in the immersive environment situation. And then they received a secondary
I believe you have cut out. Can anyone else hear? No. Okay.
No.
Oh, sorry, did I cut out?
Yeah, you did.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know where I cut out, but it was a hybrid of in-person immediate feedback within the immersive classroom that we asked them to give the teacher right after they were finished. And then there was written feedback that was provided by my students as well as by me that happened outside of that classroom session that was interactive, as well as some one-on-one between me and my students where I would give them feedback as well. So it was about a hybrid, a variety of during that process.
Okay, and it's Eileen. I guess I'll take the mic next. I routinely publish on my work, and I use an action research model. My work is with the adults themselves who are learning to be the teachers, who are learning to be the corporate designers, learning to be the instructional designers. So I had the benefit of an online program. So everything they do is captured. And I get an IRB every semester. If something significant comes up, I look at it. Now I use a process called triangulation, where I kind of look at multiple data points to see what ultimately is telling me the new thing that emerged. But just to generalize, and also if you go to the web link I keep on sending out, I do have a paper there that was published about 5 years back that kind of generalizes this approach. But I have a link to my CV, and you can see all of the different publications related to this. What I look at, I'm interested in community development within online environments. So that's generally my particular focus. Did using the VR environment actually create a better community in my class? So my learning objectives are more behavioral, affective. But what I do always do in these environments, I can tell, I get a dashboard that shows me when people show up, how long they stay. You know, I also can put in a number of analytics. What I do though is I often have the students come in, do an activity, take snapshots. They can take snapshots when they're in there. I then have them, what I call, loop it back into a discussion board. So I can, as the teacher, have a very rich observation of how my students are interacting, what's gone on. We now do immersive residencies in here because people can't always afford to travel, long before COVID. So we get together. Scott and I have published on that together. Scott Dolphin, who was just up speaking. So I do have quite a lot of publications. They tend to be qualitative with some quantitative support, but these are not huge scalable studies. They're very specific to their case studies. But I still think from that, I'm quite convinced that we are improving the communication, which is what my goal is with the use of the VR. It's to, you know, give them an example, but also to make an online class a social network and not just, you know, a discussion board. So thank you.
My answer will be relatively short here. So our group actually lives alongside of a lot of instructional design assistance and support for faculty. So whenever there's a more sophisticated research request, we would actually usually punt to the instructional design team. We also have an instructional designer specifically focused on immersive, so we would probably punt to her first and foremost.
Great, thank you, everyone. The next question is directed to the Ithaca group, and someone is asking if you could speak more about Rumi. I know that you mentioned that you are planning to move to AltSpace VR for next steps because it's more powerful. So maybe if you could speak to what you feel might be lacking from Rumi that you were looking for, and any other observations about Rumi.
Yeah, I can jump in there. First of all, we liked Rumi. It's a good platform. I think it's early for them, so we did have some audio issues, and I think they're a smaller team, so they were, I think, caught off guard by the magnitude of users who were all of a sudden on the Rumi platform. So I give them a lot of credit for having something that was stable and something that we could go to. We chose it because it was so easy to get onto, and it was fairly powerful in that you could bring in your own slides, you could bring in 3D objects. But we are moving to AltSpace because it is more robust, it's much larger, it's much more powerful. You can build your own worlds in it. But for a starting point, I think Rumi was great.
What's really nice about Rumi as well is that if you do need to use the 2D mode of Rumi, it's cross-platform, so it can be used on both OS X and on Windows.
If I could also jump in, a couple issues that we came across with Rumi was the fact that our students that were presenting couldn't actually go through the slides themselves. Like me and Catherine had to go through the slides for them, as well as the poorly designed way to look at the presentation from the room, because you can be anywhere in the room, but you have to be absurdly close to the screen for the text to be clear. Otherwise, it would be blurry and fuzzy, and then it would make people have headaches within the headsets. So that was an issue, a big issue that we came across multiple times.
I agree with Brianna. The visual part was difficult. Sometimes the text would wobble and get very shaky, and it was an issue for students who had like visual processing or balance issues. Also, we would frequently, it would overheat some of our headsets or our computers, and it would die quickly, or you would suddenly just disappear and die off of the screen and wouldn't be able to get back on. It happened to some students, especially if they didn't have the best Wi-Fi in their home or the best connections, but it also happened to me a few times while we were on there.
Yeah, and that's going to happen with the Go. I mean, that's just the Oculus Go more than anything, I think.
Adding on to what Becky mentioned earlier as well, is that Rumi seemed to be very early in its development, but it was still very taxing on any device that you decided to use it on, because if you had even a powerful computer, it still took a lot of RAM and power in order to run it, as well as on the Oculus Go. That's why it couldn't handle it.
Yeah, that was actually the hardest part about doing the tech support, was that if someone had to go out of Rumi or was bounced out for any sort of reason, whether it was headset overheating or just a poor Wi-Fi connection, in order to talk with those students offline, I had to close out of Rumi on my computer in order to go into Zoom to talk to the students, and then go back into Rumi and just re-sign on. If I had Rumi and Zoom going on at the same time, it would just completely crash my computer, and I have 16 gigabytes of RAM on my computer.
I have a follow-up question for the Ithaca group about Rumi. I've spent a little bit of time in there, and I would say that some of the spaces don't necessarily, like the architecture and design, don't necessarily look like a traditional classroom setting. And I'm curious if you got any kind of feedback from the participants about the aesthetics and whether or not that, I guess, kind of discordance between what it looked like and what they were actually doing in there, if that made a difference in their experience.
We didn't get specific feedback on the look and feel of the room. One of the things we did experience, one of the coolest things about being in an immersive space is the ambisonic sound. So the spatial audio, where you can, have a sense of how far away someone is. And what we found is that the room was too small. It was just like trying to, it was undoable. You just couldn't understand anybody. So what was nice about Rumi is that they did have very large rooms with multiple floors. So if people did want to do small groups, you could have a room that was large enough that you could have a sense that other people were talking and have that communal feel, but they weren't interrupting or disruptive to your own conversation. But as far as the visual aspect, I think people just sort of enjoyed being in a futuristic, beautiful looking place. And that, I don't know, Christine, if you got any feedback about that having it not look like a traditional classroom was not a big deal.
No, I don't think I got any feedback on that. I think they were so excited and into the complications of trying to, even some of these students had never in their life been in a virtual reality headset. In fact, most of them hadn't. So I think that they were so excited to even be around each other in this space that they weren't really paying attention to the surroundings as much as maybe we were.
Great, thank you for that clarification. We have another question about difference in impact, if any, when you're presenting an immersive 3D interactive lesson using a mouse, keyboard, and flat screen versus doing an immersive lesson using a headset and the hand controls. So if any of the presenters have any thoughts on the difference in the impact between, I think, a desktop lesson versus a lesson done in a headset.
I would actually love to comment on this if it's okay to take the lead. So when we had students in headset, we found that being able to turn your head when someone is talking and enunciate or, add to your conversations with hand gestures, that really did help in conversation. It does falter when we had students join in the 2D versions, because you would just find that their avatar stood straight up and looked straight ahead. So that was a pro, absolutely, of using the headset. A con, of course, is that we did have students get dizzy, and they would kind of mentally check out once when they got dizzy in the headset and they switched to 2D. So there's a balance to it, but in terms of making you feel like you were talking to another person, the headset did win out in that favor.
Adding on to that, I'd say from my experience, being in a class in the 3D versus 2D, it's easier to focus because when you're wearing the headset, you're immersed into the experience. You're in this room, you're looking at a person talking, as opposed to a 2D flat screen. It's very easy to check out and not pay attention during a Zoom call.
And it's Eileen. I'd just like to make a general comment too. And I think I've heard this from others. In general, it's not the technology. You know, they help, they support, but it's the lesson, it's the storyline, it's the curriculum. You know, so you use the affordances of the different technologies, but it's hard to do a, you know, back-to-back comparison unless you really have the same kind of storyline in all of them. So I just encourage everybody to use the affordances to their best ability and to remember to put in a reason for using them, you know, a reason for getting together. It's not just to play with the technologies. So just a side comment there.
And then Nick, I'm wondering from your experience with Penn State, if you've noticed any kind, I don't know if you use desktop options, but if you've seen a difference in learning experiences or outcomes, desktop compared to a headset.
So from our point of view, since we want to make this as accessible to faculty, again, who are just trying to dip their toes in, we do want to be able to make sure that students can access these experiences that we're providing, usually again with 360 video from whatever device they're working with. Especially now going to a fall where we're not sure if students will have access to the Oculus Go headsets that we have available or other devices that we have available. We do want to make sure that the class activities that we're designing are usable on a phone, are usable on a desktop, and even during normal times, whatever those are now, we do find, as was mentioned by the Ithaca group, that some students do get dizzy really quickly with a headset, and that's obviously going to be a barrier to their learning.
I just wanted to note that it's almost time. We did start a few minutes late, so I'm happy to stick around and field more questions if the presenters are keen to do so, but I just wanted to make this note in case people wanted to move to the next. There is an exhibition poster and showcase session, but again, I'm happy to stick around and field more questions if people are interested, but just wanted to note that. Okay, so there is another question. I think it's directed to the Ithaca group, but I think it might be in some ways applicable to the others in terms of whether or not you have created worlds in AltSpace VR, if you're planning to create a world for the teaching experience. And I would extend this to Eileen and to Nick to hear about whether you have created worlds or faculty have created worlds in AltSpace or maybe in other, well, I know, Eileen, you have created worlds in other, so we'll stick to AltSpace.
Well, we are currently recreating the Ithaca College campus in AltSpace VR for our summer project. It kind of goes along the line of we can't be on campus, and being able to visit our campus in a virtual way, it's really comforting, and just building it is really fun. So students will be able to go to AltSpace VR, have an on-campus experience, and then be able to teleport into different types of classrooms. We'll be starting off in July with the education department doing their student teaching, and then we're going to explore. We have a fantastic music school, so we are going to be experimenting with one of our opera faculty members to teach opera and stage presence in the AltSpace VR environment. And we look forward to maybe working with our theater department and anybody else we can drag in there.
I agree with Becky. I think that for our students, what we've heard from our Ithaca College students is they really want to be there in person. And if they can't be, they want ways to do that. And they aren't content with simply doing Zoom or having an asynchronous class altogether. They really want to have this social experience of being with their peers and being in a room. And for myself, having education students, it's extremely important that they have that interaction and that ability to perform as teachers, because it is a performance. And so, and as Becky mentioned, we have many other areas in our other colleges on the campus that really want that experience too. So I think it's valuable, and it's something I think we're going to hear more from our colleagues about.
And it's Eileen, I'd like to address this too, because the reason that we went over to open source was that we could get preloaded islands. They're made available by artists. The students then either create their own or modify them. So you actually were creating inventories of these islands. Now what you do on the island, again, is going to be specific to what your group needs. But we have islands that look like the, honestly, one that looked like the plague. I have one from the, from back in the days of the Middle Ages. I have one that looks like a citadel that you can bring a fort in. I use that to teach STEM, you know, where we bring and put context into our work. So the nice thing about the open source, there are islands available. I have students who've made them, you know, so let me know if you're interested. Depends on what they've made, but these islands are transportable to other people. So it does depend on what the students have done. And Scott's island is beautiful. He is an artist. My islands are made by a STEM person. So you want to meet somebody like Scott, who has, he brings in cultures from, you know, early civilization up to European cultures, to cultures in other countries. And he's built this all into his island when he teaches the immersion into cultural studies. So again, the nice thing about the old school immersion is that there are a lot of free resources.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions. If I've missed anything or questions that have not been answered through the chat, if I've missed any questions, last burning questions you'd like to ask, I'll just give people a moment to either copy paste what I missed into the chat box or type in another question, but I think we can bring this amazing panel to a close. Arun is running, but I also wanted to echo what he said. What a wonderful panel. He says, for the first time in this conference, I wish I was seeing you guys in real life. Sorry, virtual reality. And I think that's so true. I have learned so much from all of the presenters. I really appreciate all of the time that you've taken to put together this presentation. For those of you, if you haven't, please watch their pre-recorded YouTube videos. I found them really useful. I think we could probably stay here and ask a lot more questions, but I know there are other sessions, and so yes, just wanted to say thank you to the presenters, and thank you so much to the audience for coming here and asking such great questions. Really appreciate it. So we can end with a round of applause and or dancing if you want to follow on from the last presentation.
And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.